Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here for our first Multiple Literacies Lab presentation of the semester. The Multiple Literacies Lab is a collaborative effort from the School and Youth Services faculty here at UNT. These faculty members include myself, Daniela Smith, Dr. Kwan, who directs our school librarianship program, Dr. Sarah Evans, who directs our youth services program, and our newest faculty member, Dr. Katie Klein. And we are so honored to have her here with us at UNT. Dr. Klein recently completed her Ph.D. at the University of South Carolina. She worked for 10 years as a secondary school librarian before moving into higher education. So we're so glad that she's able to share her expertise with us, and hopefully we'll get her to join us in another one of our monthly webinars. But without further delay, I introduce to you Dr. Katie Klein. Dr. Klein, welcome. And let's give her a wonderful round of virtual applause, please.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Let me get my slides up. Here we go. Okay, continue to share. There we go. Okay, everybody see my slides right now? We're good? Okay, perfect. So I am, as Dr. Smith said, I am new here. I just got here, so I'm going to share my dissertation research with all of you. Hopefully I can, there's still people coming in. Okay. So I came to this research from my experience in schools. So I was a school librarian for 10 years, first in a private boarding school in Virginia, and then I did some nonprofit work, and then I came back to school librarianship at a public high school in Maine. And then I started the library at a charter school in Massachusetts. So that was what I was doing during the pandemic. And around that time, I was kind of rethinking, as we all were with the pandemic, like what do I want to do with my life? What should happen next? And I thought, there's a lot of questions that I have about why I had to start a library in a charter school that's been around for 20 years. Why didn't they already have a library? Why is this hard? This shouldn't be hard in a, pretty wealthy urban area, and how is this looking in other charter schools? So I thought the way I should deal with this is research, which one of the teachers said is a crazy way to go about it, that I could have done 100 other things to try and make libraries more universal, but I thought research, and she said, okay, well, go for it. And so I did. So I got my PhD, and so that's kind of why I have this focus on charter schools, and you'll see how that all ties into where I was going with this. If you're not familiar with charter schools, they are this kind of mix of public and private. So they're privately run like a private school, but they're publicly funded like a public school. So the way that they're regulated is different from both of those. And so they are in a really unique situation that was initially conceived as a way to innovate schools, to make it so that teachers could take a more leadership role than they had in the past, and really try some innovations that would help to reach students that hadn't been reached before. And this came out of teacher unions originally. So you can see how now our perception of charter schools and where they've gone is quite different from where they were originally envisioned to be. But there are still a lot of elements of innovation and teacher leadership that are really interesting in charter schools and do have a lot to say to more traditional schools. So that's where all of this stuff starts. Okay, it won't let me. Okay, I just have to click. I can't push the arrow. Every time. Okay, so my statement of problem, information literacy is important, clearly. I framed this around the 7 pillars of information literacy for a lot of reasons, and I'm not really going to get into all of that. So school librarians are trained experts in teaching information literacy, but only about half of charter schools have libraries. So even fewer actually have librarians. So this is a problem. And so as librarians, we don't really understand how charter schools are approaching information literacy because we don't have librarians in all of those schools to tell us. So I was really interested in looking at charter schools, both the ones that have a library and the ones that don't. How are they doing things differently than other traditional schools? So, so this is understudied. There just is not much research out there on charter school libraries. There's research on charter schools, there's research on libraries. There aren't as many people studying where they're both together. But the charter school sector is growing, especially grew a lot during the pandemic. There were a lot of parents who were opting out of traditional schools in different ways. And so I think it's really important for us to understand what's going on here. And it's not just in the US. This public-private partnership hybrid model is growing in a whole lot of places around the world. So we've got to get this right because this is a real equity problem, especially since charter schools a higher percentage of charter schools are majority Black or majority Latino than traditional schools. So they're definitely serving an underserved population in a lot of places. They're often urban and they're just not as well understood. So we have to make sure that we're doing this right. If we're putting increasing amounts of money into this sector, if we're sending more and more students into this sector, we need to be doing it better. And school libraries aren't universal anyway. Even in traditional schools, the percentage of schools that have libraries is going down. If you look at those slide studies, fewer and fewer schools have librarians, whether they have a library or not, and their principals may be answering these surveys saying, yeah, we have a library, but it may not be staffed, or it might be staffed by someone with really limited background in how libraries should work. So they may not be getting the resources that they need to run their library as well as they should. So there's just a lot of things that we need to be looking at in order to make sure that students are being served in all kinds of schools. So my research question, let's go on to the next slide. How are the principles of information literacy being taught across the curriculum in charter schools? So this is just really general, broad, like what's going on in charter schools. This is an exploratory study. I don't have like statistical significance. It's not that kind of a study. It's an ethnographic study. So just so you can see them, these are those 7 pillars that I talked about. So these were the kinds of things that I was looking at to tell where information literacy was happening. So, I mean, these are the ones that we're talking about. Like, how do you manage information? How do you evaluate it? How do you present it, gather it, identify it? How do you plan? How do you scope information when you're doing research? So this is really research skills, but also these are general enough that they count beyond what you're doing for academics, beyond what you're doing for career preparation. These are also things that people need in their everyday life so that they can find the information that they need to just like have a good quality of life, to find what they need to find on the internet, to know what's real, not get scammed, avoid misinformation, all of that stuff. It's just more and more important that people have like a good foundation in information literacy than I think probably ever before. So that's what I was looking for. Yeah. let's move on to the next one. Make sure I'm getting all of my notes here. Okay, so the theoretical framework. So like I said, this was an ethnographic study, but a specific kind, an institutional ethnography. So with institutional ethnography, it uses a critical lens to map power dynamics. So ethnography is always kind of a cultural study where you go into a place and you try and figure out what is their culture like, what does it mean? And you can focus on all kinds of different things. You could focus on music, you could focus on parenting, any aspect of culture. So in this case, I'm looking at education, but using an institutional ethnography to look at how the education system is working so that we can tell how are teachers making decisions about what they're teaching, who's telling them to make those, to do it that way. Are there policies that are influencing what they're doing? What are the parents telling them to do? All of these different power dynamics are at work in our education system. So it seemed like an especially good way to go about doing this. Also, the feminist roots of this theoretical framework include a lot of caring work. So it's used a lot in education, in nursing, I don't know, in a lot of areas where it's not just paid employment, although looking at power dynamics, a lot of times that is what you look at. But with institutional ethnography, you can also look at other systems that are outside of paid work that include work. And teachers, as we know, school staff, school faculty do all kinds of work that is beyond what their paycheck would assume that they're doing, and involves like the emotional work that happens beyond what you were necessarily trained to do, not just the technical work that you've been employed to do. You're not a robot. But also this method centers those who are deeply involved with the problem. So what you're interested in is teachers, students, families. You're looking at the people who are really involved in this problem, and you trust what they say. You assume that they know what they're talking about because they deal with this every day. It's part of the work that they do. And like I'd said, this was very exploratory. This is not the kind of thing where I have like a list of statistics to give you at the end of this. All of this is what people said to me, what feelings we got about it all, experiencing in the school, what things are like. It's mostly to give me more questions to look at in the future. And I intend to do that because I think it's really interesting. Okay, so a little bit more about that. I spent time in 2 charter high schools, and those were actually 2 days in the school, and then there were more interviews on Zoom afterwards. But also, it wasn't just that time in the school interviewing teachers. It was also observations there, and then all of these texts. So it looks at websites and assignments, and their charter documents, communications, basically anything that can help me understand what they're doing and why. All of that stuff matters. And one of the pieces of institutional ethnography that's really interesting is that it's a method that knows that texts can control your work as well. It's not always just a boss, but it can also be like forms that you have to fill out, make you do them in a certain way. So that's controlling your work as well. And we know that in schools, there's a ton of different kinds of textual things going on. There's the actual textbooks, there's the curriculum, there's every time you get a communication from the superintendent or anybody else in the mix. So there's a lot of different things going on here. And so that was a lot of things to process, but I will try and show you what came out of that. But just a little more background on where I went. So these are the two charter schools that I went to, and they're quite different. So they're not the kind of thing where you can compare them one against another, but they're both super interesting places to go. One of them is really big. They're part of a big district, but they're a charter school within the district. Their conversion, they were a traditional public school, but they decided like more than 20 years ago to become charter. So they did that because they have a culture of leadership within their school, and they really wanted to have the opportunity to try a lot of things out and be really competitive. So they just do a lot of really interesting things. They also have just an amazing library program. So it was just a good way to see how a charter school can have a library program that is still kind of part of the district, but is really leading in their own school in a lot of ways. So they're the only school in their district that did not have to genreify because everybody else did, because it makes a lot more sense in the lower grades than it does in the high school level. And for an IB school, they wanted to not genreify, and they were allowed to because that's one of the areas where they have the freedom to do that. So that's kind of interesting with them. The other school that I called STEM Prep, they are quite different. They're very small. They're kind of startup. They're really scrappy and cool. They have a STEM focus, but they also have SEL built into their day every single day. So it's a very tight-knit community. It's actually majority Black. It's meant to be serving this rural population that has a lot of generational poverty and not a lot of opportunities in their area for employment. So it's super important that they are getting good career training so that they can either go to community college or go to college or get a job in either in their area that has kind of limited opportunities, but also to be able to leave if they want to leave and go find more opportunities. So their teachers are super dedicated, very close knit. And it's just a real family atmosphere. It was just amazing how caring everybody was and how everybody knows everybody. It's one of those schools where since it's K through 12, although I was really focusing on the high school part because that's where my study is, but those high schoolers have younger brothers and sisters in the middle school and the elementary school. They have cousins in those grades. And so they really are, there's a lot of caring going on among the students and among the teachers. So that one's super interesting too. They don't have a school library yet, although their new building has a little space in their lobby that they're going to have a small library. So hopefully that's opened. They had some delays on construction last year, so I wasn't able to see their new building yet. I could see the outside, but they weren't letting people in yet. Hopefully they're there and they're doing some good stuff there. It is so community-based that they have a lot of partnerships, and their partnership with the public library is really interesting. So that was something that I was looking at. And their public library, their youth librarian there, absolutely lovely. I spoke with her, interviewed her, and she is so supportive of this school. Like, she goes to parent meetings. She doesn't have kids in the school, but she goes to parent meetings and tells them about things like the state library databases that are available to them. So, so just really lovely people to work with at both of these schools. And they let me in, and I learned all kinds of cool things from them. So also, you cannot generalize that all charter schools are like these schools. These are unique places. Charter schools are all kind of unique, but I think these are especially unique. And partly I think that because they're the ones that let me in. I asked every charter school that had had a high school that had been open for at least 5 years in South Carolina and a bunch in North Carolina. These were the only two that would let me come do research. So that tells you something about how confident they are in their programs and how open they are to finding out what research says about what they're doing, and being open to improving based on what data tells them. So these are I think, pretty extraordinary schools. So although you wouldn't necessarily know that from their test scores, don't necessarily say that they're the most extraordinary, but I think in a lot of ways they're really wonderful schools. So like I said, it's not statistics, it's all, the data is all textual analysis, it was coding. So I did 2 different levels of coding. The first one was inductive, which means that I just labeled it based on what I saw in what was happening. So some of that was guided by what I had asked in the interviews, because they responded to the questions that I asked them. So everybody told me about the kinds of things that I asked them about. But they also told me other things. So there were themes that were coming out of that. But it's descriptive, kind of telling. This first level was, what is this data telling me? So the second level of data analysis was more concept coding. So this was based on my theoretical frameworks. So I was looking for some things about school culture. I was looking for some things about information literacy. And so I went through and read everything again so that I could label it all with this concept coding. So with this, I had developed a list of the kinds of things that I was looking for and labeled it with that. So like academic press is, how competitive are they academically? How much are they trying to send kids to college? So I looked at rigor in that piece. So yeah, so I took a lot of time because I just thought it was really interesting to frame where I was going with this, but the findings are super interesting too. So I want to make sure that there's time for me to talk about that. So I really found 4 major themes in the data that had to do with information literacy and how that was working in their school. Teacher leadership was huge. The individualized college and career prep was kind of talking about how they support a lot of different directions and pathways that students can take to realize their dreams. So it might be that they have a vocational program, or that they send students to a vocational program at a community college. It might be that they have IB programs or AP programs or dual enrollment. It might be that they just have a lot of opportunities for students to do independent study or to take online classes for credit. So these were things that I saw there, and I felt that that really seemed to make it, well, we'll talk more about that when I get to those slides. The third one was social and emotional support. Both schools had that as a big part of how they work. And then support from libraries, whether that was their own library within the school or they had partnerships in other places. So I'll talk more about these things. So teacher leadership is ideally one of the things that charter schools can do really well. It can happen in any school, and I'm sure it does happen in most schools. But I think charter schools have a little more opportunity. There's a little more expectation that that is part of what they do and how they do it. And some of it they have to do because they don't necessarily have as much district support. So they need, in a lot of cases, they need their teachers to be wearing a lot of other hats. So there's a lot of opportunity at these schools for leadership, innovation, professional development. So they're doing that stuff at the teacher level. And so it's really more of a bottom-up grassroots organizational structure rather than the district tells you what to do, you do it. Yeah, so there were a lot of great things I saw from that, and I will tell you about what that has to do with information literacy. So I saw a couple of really great examples of this. One of them was the AI policy was completely initiated by an English teacher. At this school, they have a lot of freedom on how they use their professional development money, and they get grants to send teachers to do professional development outside the school, outside the district. This English teacher had said a few years ago, I'm really interested in AI. I want to understand how this works. She happened to have a background in technology integration. So it was really in her wheelhouse to be like, I'm going to be the one who finds out about AI and I'm going to bring this back to my school. So she did. She made herself an expert and experimented with it in her classes, taught other teachers how to do good stuff. And she got together a committee to write a policy that was specific to their school. I think a lot of schools are adopting boilerplate AI policies just based on like what's out there, what people are telling them they should do. But if you have an expert in your school who can say, this is how we want to address it here, I think that's really powerful. And she, with her background in English and technology integration, she just had like a really good framework for how this should work in their school, how they should approach it. And it seemed to be really guided by information literacy as well. Another thing I saw was scientific book studies. This one, a science teacher had used novels in her previous school, and they weren't doing it in this school. So she said, we should be doing this in our school. So she started teaching the other teachers how to do it in the science department. And she approached the library and said, hey, I want to do this. And the librarian said, yeah, you should totally do that. And so they helped her get the funding to buy classroom sets of stuff. And so it's a really neat approach to science. And not all of the science teachers do it in all of their classes. But the fact that this teacher was really gung-ho about it and got it so that they have that option in a lot of classes. And she's developing a graphic novels collection now to use in science classes as well, because it's such a good way to explain basic concepts. So that was super interesting. And you can see how that's helping with literacy as well. And so these are things that just would not necessarily happen in an environment without teacher leadership. All right, next one. So this is that piece about having a lot of different options for what you're going to do after high school. So the nice thing about this with information literacy is that you're learning information literacy in classes that match your career aspirations, and that you're really interested in. So if you're really interested in I don't know, cooking, then there are opportunities for learning information literacy within a culinary class. And I saw this kind of thing happening, like their engineering classes were at the Seashore High School. They were just doing these cool invention things, and they were learning so much about intellectual property that you just wouldn't necessarily get anywhere in a core class. But if you're taking an engineering set of classes and getting that certification, intellectual property is like super duper important. And that's a piece of information literacy that we just don't necessarily address in other contexts. There was also just a ton of independent learning and online classes in the STEM prep school, because their high school is such a small piece of their school so far, and they're really small to begin with. So they have a lot of their classes online. Their core classes are all in person, but their extracurricular, their electives are basically all online. And that's really tough for freshmen. So there's some real drawbacks to having so much of their curriculum be online learning at this point. But you can see how by the time they're juniors and seniors, they really have learned how to be independent learners. So and they're getting the support to do those online classes. They still have to go to class every day. They still have to be with their teachers. They still have to be in this really supportive small school. So it's not like they're off on their own, just doing their high school entirely online. They're getting the support that they need to do online classes and really learn to be independent about it. Yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff going on there, and they're getting this individual support, and they're also getting group support. There's a lot of programs at each of these schools that can kind of fill in information literacy gaps. I saw an interesting place where the Big Brothers Big Sisters group at one of the schools was doing this career prep stuff that was like entirely information literacy, and they actually had one of the librarians in the area come in and do that for them. So there's just these places where when you do have these options and this caring community, you can really find out where students need more information literacy and get that into it somehow. Okay. Yeah, so I said all of that before I got to this one. So here were the examples that I was originally going to talk about. But yeah, they do interesting things at both of these schools that are in addition to what I already talked about. Okay, let's move on to social emotional learning. Yeah, this is a big part of both schools. They're very mission-based, and I think you'd find that at a lot of private schools, but I think missions get lost a lot in public schools, especially if they're really big. By the high school, it's like their mission is basically like get you out of high school with a degree and get you to college if possible. That's not a really robust mission, if you ask me. Like there's more to it, and I think that these schools were kind of doing that in the best possible way, being very mission driven. I would not say that necessarily every charter takes advantage of this opportunity to be mission driven, but ideally they would. And I would say a lot of private schools do this really well. So this is one of those pieces that you can see that it's not just charter schools, but it's also not every charter school. So there's just a lot of gray space in all of this, which is kind of my favorite world, is the gray part. Anyway, caring relationships, super important to build trust. That's how you get students to ask you, does this sound crazy to you? Is this something that I should repost? So yeah, they do. They had all of the teachers I talked to had examples of times when they told students how to go about doing things better. And a lot of times how they had students come to them and ask them, does this sound right to you? Is this a scam? I mean, they just do that as part of their everyday life. And that's fantastic because that's like part of teaching now, right? But it doesn't mean that everybody is equipped to do that. But I would say that one of the best things about this, okay, let me go on to my next slide here. Okay, no, let me go back to the other one. Okay. So this isn't necessarily something that's always connected with information literacy because it feels like too emotional instead of intellectual, but they're really connected because if you don't have the dispositions to use the skills, you're not going to do it consistently. So, I mean, I think that a lot of people get into college and they have the skill, like they can use resources appropriately, they can search for quality articles, but they might not do it because it's easier to not do it. It's easier to use Google. They might know that they're not supposed to plagiarize, but they might not do that. Their behavior might not be in line with what they know is the right thing to do. But if they've been taught to develop more emotional intelligence, more maturity, if they understand the ethical reasons for being a better global citizen and a better online user, like this is the social and emotional support just makes that connection. It just helps with all of that, I think. It seemed to me that that was a thing that was happening. But again, I don't have the proof for it here because this isn't a proving study. This is an exploratory study. But I think that there's a lot of things that we need to find out about this, because I think that this is an important missing part in a lot of our information literacy training that we do for students. So a couple of things that I saw, like I said, building trust across the school community, super important, but also just having everyday social emotional learning built into the curriculum is just so valuable in so many ways. It was so mission-based, but it was also really authentic. The teachers were teaching the students how to grow up and be the best people that they can be, giving them the self-confidence and emotional awareness, the regulation skills from kindergarten to 12th grade. That's just so valuable, and so few schools will do this, and social emotional learning is getting such a bad rep these days, and it is not deserved because it's absolutely valuable. And I think it's very valuable for information literacy as well. Okay, my last theme, support from the libraries. So obviously we're librarians. I don't need to tell you how great libraries are. But they just are. They're doing this information literacy work. If they're in the library, then they have a lot of opportunity to be leaders in this. To teach information literacy to the teachers and to the students. But even if there isn't a library in the school, partnerships with other libraries really can make a difference. It's not a substitute for a school library, but it makes a difference. So I could see that happening in these schools. Yeah. One place that I thought that they both could use a little bit more work was developing their partnerships with the academic libraries that their students were supposed to be using in dual enrollment. And it was just not clear that they were using those to the degree that they should be using them in order to be doing college level work to get those credits. Because really nobody in the high schools that I talked to knew what was going on with the academic libraries. They were like, they're there, the students have access to their databases. I don't know what they're doing with them. I'm like, maybe somebody should find out what they're doing and maybe get a little bit more going on with them. But that's not to say that they're not getting any support there, because the students could be getting support. And I know that at least one of these schools was taking field trips to a university to use some of their facilities. And that included getting information literacy lesson at the library to help them with a research project that the older students were working on. So that's just an opportunity to partnership with academic libraries who would be, I think, delighted to work with high schoolers now and then. But I think people forget that they're there, or they think that they're just too busy to deal with my high schoolers. But I think that that's a huge missed opportunity when it's not happening. And you hear about it now and then, but it should be happening much, much more, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm probably just about out of time, but so yes, so I looked at the ruling relations within the education system and the charter school stakeholders. I don't know that you're really that interested in that, so I'm not really going to worry about that. The more interesting part is the practical stuff. So practically, I just think that these 4 themes that I talked about are just things that you as a librarian in whatever setting you're in can be encouraging teacher leadership. You can be taking leadership. Um, you can be encouraging different pathways, not just working with the English classes or the social studies classes, but reach out to the science classes, see if they've ever thought about doing a novel study. Reach out to vocational classes and see if you can support them in some way. A lot of that stuff is very computer based now, and they can use the help. Social emotional learning, any way you can get that into the library, I think is fantastic. I think we have a lot of opportunity to do that stealthily with like bibliotherapy and with the kinds of things that we choose to put on display. But I think it needs to be integrated. And if there's anybody pushing for any kind of social emotional learning in your school, I think the more you can do to support them, the better. And then finally, libraries, like just advocate for your library, keep it alive, don't let it die. Because it's just super important. And I think every time we do research that shows all of these different ways that librarians are helping out, that libraries make a difference in kids' lives, it's there. The proof isn't always numerical, but there is just tons of anecdotal evidence, and there's actually statistical evidence too. So we just need to keep using it to advocate for libraries because they're just so important for this and for so many other things. Okay, let's see what slides I didn't do. More about ruling relations. Again, I don't think you really care. Yeah. Okay, so here's the other things that I didn't really tell you about. Equity, like I said, in charter schools, it's super important, but information literacy also, there's equity pieces to that. There's critical information literacy that is really looking at empowering people to help themselves, to help others. So if we can have a little bit more of that critical information literacy happening in schools, on the critical part, because we're not really supposed to be doing that anymore, but it is sort of putting some of that emotional learning into your information literacy. School leadership in charter schools is different, but that doesn't mean that it's always better. It doesn't mean that it's always worse. You work with whatever leadership you've got. So that's what we do. But the more we can work with our leadership, the better we can all be pulling in the same direction. You have opportunities to do PD with teachers. They come in with a lot of different skill levels on their own information literacy. So the better their information literacy is, the more they can help the students do it better. And again, advocacy, always want to, emphasize how important that is. Okay, I think we're almost done. Future research, yes. I intend to continue doing research. I want to look more at charter schools. I am super interested in finding out what virtual charter schools are doing, but I'm also interested in finding out more what's going on with these different things that I've found. I want to find actual practices that are helping to build information literacy dispositions, because those are things that can be applied in schools that have a library and schools that don't. So we want to do that. I want to look more at partnering with public libraries because I don't think that happens as much. And I definitely, like, career long, I want to look at establishing new school libraries and what practices we can do to make that happen. What are the steps along the way? Because that doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't happen for free. So we've got to make it easier, we've got to take away some of those barriers and help schools that don't have school libraries to find the funding, get the support, make it happen, because school libraries should be universal. That's just my opinion. Yeah. So that's where those are things that I want to do. One of the ways that I want to work on the social emotional learning stuff is my next study is going to be collaborating with a professor in school counseling. So together we're going to be looking at what libraries and school counselors can be doing together to get more social emotional learning in schools. So, because I just think that that's super important and helpful. And I think it'll help librarians and counselors if you're working together more. Siloed is not good. So, yeah, so I think that's exciting. Yeah, so this is exploratory. It's just the bite at the beginning of my research agenda and just starting to look at information literacy in charter schools. Yeah, so there is more work to do, but I hope to be doing it. And I would love to be working with all of you too. If you're interested in finding out about some of these things in your own schools, let me know and I would be happy to work with you. And then I have a million references because this came from my dissertation. So that is my presentation. And yeah.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Klein. That's awesome. And so, we do have a couple questions over here in the chat. Do you want me to read the questions out loud for you, or do you prefer to read them yourself? I'm happy to do either way.
Why don't you read them so that everybody can hear what I'm going to respond to?
Sounds good. So this is from Sarah. Sarah, and if I say your name wrong, I apologize. Sarah Stagliano has a bird on her shoulder, by the way, y'all.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. You're about this big in on my
So
screen.
cute. And Sarah and her sweet bird wonder, when you had the opportunity to observe these schools, was there anything super that stood out to you that you would want to use as a school librarian, or something that you thought, wow, I wish I had that opportunity when I was that age?
Well, the seashore they just had really great facilities. Their school is wealthier than any of the schools I ever worked at, except the boarding school, but that was a whole different situation because also much smaller. But they had a beautiful library. So there were a lot of things that I wished that I'd had with them. But I thought one of the neat things that they had that was not related to my research was a board game area. And they had a whole collection of board games. I skipped over their learning time, but one of the cool things about this school is that instead of having lunch blocks and having like a quarter of the kids go to lunch at 11 o'clock in the morning and a quarter of the kids go after that and give them each 15 minutes to eat, but they give everybody in the whole school like an hour lunch break, and they're allowed to do kind of whatever they want within parameters.
Mhm.
So the students, unless they get in trouble and it's taken away from them and they have to be in a study hall for half of it and get their lunch in the other half, they're allowed to go to club meetings, they're allowed to do tutoring in the library, they're allowed to just be in the library as long as they're quiet because it's a study area. They're allowed to go out in the courtyard and hang out, and that's kind of wild, but they're allowed to be there. They're allowed to get help from their teachers. A lot of their teachers do kind of office hours during part of that time. But it means that because they have a long span of time, they can decide which part of the day they want to be doing their lunch and use the rest of their time however they want. So in order to facilitate this time as well as possible, a lot of the teachers have things set up in their rooms to keep kids occupied if they want to be there. They had things to do in the library. the tutoring, but the games. And I saw kids playing chess just in the middle of the day, casually. Like I couldn't do that when I was in high school. None of the high schools where I worked was that really possible. I mean, I always had a few escapees from the cafeteria who would come and eat in the library because they didn't like the cafeteria madness. But I'd never seen a lunch that was run this way, and I thought it was just super cool, and I thought that it was really productive. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much. Bethany said, with the charter schools that you observed, did the teachers all have certifications, or what types of certification did they hold?
So most of them had certification because in South Carolina, and I think that like 75 or 85% of the teachers have to have certification. So the people who don't tend to be people who have some other kind of certification that's not teaching, that's related to what they're doing. So like it might be hard to find a Spanish teacher out in the country. So that person might not have certification, but they are fluent in Spanish, and they have other qualifications besides teaching. So, I mean, I think that we hear a lot about how charter schools are out there wild without any certifications, but I think in practice it's pretty small percentage. Although again, these were pretty exceptional schools, I thought. So they're definitely doing what they're supposed to be doing. And at one of the schools, the people who didn't have certification were all enrolled in some kind of program to get them teaching certification as soon as possible, because their school's growing and they want to be able to hire more teachers. And because they had to have like 75 or 85% of their teachers certified, they couldn't just hire anybody. But if they can get the people that are already working there certified, then they have more options in their future hiring. So they're being strategic about it.
Smart.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right. And then Karina, I'm sorry, Corinna, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Would a librarian in charter schools be held to the AASL standards? Do they still use the national standards?
So
Like,
interestingly, I'm not sure anybody is really held to the ASL standards. Is anybody getting evaluated on that by the principal?
No, I mean we are here. We use the preparation standards for our curriculum, at UNT, because we are accredited through the American Library Association. But technically there's not necessarily a lot of oversight about, there's no one coming and checking this to make sure you use all the standards. Although we do teach you about them in the
Yeah.
coursework. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the hard things about ASL is they don't have any real carrots or sticks. So you learn about these good practices in library school, and then it's sort of up to you to do them. If you have a good coordinator in your district, then they might be using them to evaluate you, but anybody else who might be evaluating you probably doesn't even know that ASL exists unless you tell them about it. I mean, I've never had a principal who had any idea that libraries had standards. So yeah, I mean, that's just sort of across the board, our kind of our field's lack of communication at all levels. But it's probably true that charter schools are even less, because they're less likely to have a coordinator for the district if they're not really part of a district, or they're sort of only kind of part of a district. Then they can probably also bow out of whatever they want to bow out of. So yeah, I mean, one of these schools didn't have a library, didn't have a librarian, so they're definitely not paying attention to ASL standards. The other one, I would say that they are, since they have such a strong professional development program in their school, I know that these are librarians who go to the state conference and are part of the state organization. And so I would guess that they're pretty savvy about all of it. They certainly could talk about some of those things that are on the standards.
Thank you so much. And then Tabitha said, what is the one big thing that stood out to you as a difference between public versus charter librarian duties / availability? Also, was there something maybe you found lacking at the charter school compared maybe to public school?
So ultimately, I think the differences between school libraries are less about the whether they're charter, private, public, and more high school, middle school, elementary school. Those are all vastly different situations. And whether your school has more money. I mean, that's the real difference. Honestly, that's the real difference with education, you know? If your school doesn't have money, then you're always going to be screwed. If your school has money, then you're always going to be better off. It's just how it is. It shouldn't be. We need to work for that to not be the deciding factor, because everybody deserves to have a great education, wherever they live, whatever their community looks like. And everybody deserves to have a great librarian. But you know, we are working with different things in different communities. So that's just how it is right now.
Absolutely, yes. And Casey said school librarians already wear so many hats. So I can imagine the work is never ending in an all hands on deck charter school atmosphere. How did the energy level / burnout risk of the librarians you observe compare to those of public school librarians that you know? What factors do you infer influence the similarities or differences?
Yeah, so again, money matters here. The librarians at the charter school that had a library where I studied had it pretty darn good. They I mean, they just had it good. They didn't have a lot of duties outside the library. They had a lot of opportunity to do great things in the library. They had 2 full-time librarians and a full-time assistant. So like
Nice.
they had it good. Um, the other school didn't have a library. They barely had enough teachers. So that was definitely all hands on deck for all the teachers there. And I think the burnout rate there is very high. That rich school that I talked about, the Seashore School, their turnover rate is like 0.05% or something crazy like that. People get a job there and they stay forever if they can. I talked to people who had been there since the school became a charter school more than 20 years ago, because that's just how like the school's great. They're in a great neighborhood. They have lots of money. Like they're living pretty. They're living well there.
They come and stay.
But not everybody gets that. I mean, in schools where I worked, I had other duties as assigned. And in the other school, the teachers did too. And their burnout rate, I think, was pretty high. The people who I talked to were very committed, but they have a pretty high turnover. And several of the people that I talked to were new that year or had only been there for a couple of years. And I had to actually talk to people in the middle and the elementary school in order to get some real institutional history, because so the high school staff was so new, except for one who was on maternity leave. And so it was just like, it's just another one of those realities. And yet, even with all of this, the school culture is so strong that I think that they're really doing a lot of valuable things with their students. And some of their administrators have been there since the beginning. Their founder is still like their principal. So he's really committed that to this for life.
Okay, wonderful. We have a few comments then. Let's see. Sarah said that sounds like a wonderful thing to be able to practice time management as a student and to just breathe a bit during the day. I think she's talking about that nice 1 hour lunch. I think I never had a lunch break when I was a librarian. I feel like I was always eating my sandwich while you're around, doing all those things you just never get a chance to do. But that does sound like heaven.
So, I mean, it's funny because those librarians, they were working through that lunch. The whole school has lunch. They were working during
They're
that
working
time because they're running a tutoring program.
right.
So, yeah, but they had enough staff that they could trade off so that it's not like they were eating at 3 o'clock or they weren't having lunch at all. But I mean, they had a working lunch.
A working lunch, and that's okay. That is kind of normal, I think, in the library. Bethany said she definitely agrees, and many thanks. Teresa said thank you so much for this information. I'm a public librarian. My question is, what suggestions would you offer to public libraries who want to reach out to their local charter schools?
Um, So it always sounds really simple to set up these partnerships, but it's actually pretty complicated because everybody's so busy. What I would say is be persistent about contacting people because a lot of times the librarian will reach out to the principal and the principal is busy and has 100 other things going on. If there's a librarian at the school, that should be your first contact because they're the one who's most likely to want to partner with you. If they're not available or if there isn't one, I would say start reaching out to English teachers or in an elementary school, whoever you might know. They're in your community, so maybe you know one of the teachers at the school. If you can leverage those relationships that already exist, you're much more likely to be able to get like a real partnership going. But don't give up just because the principal is busy and seems like they're not paying attention to you. They have a lot of things going on. And if they're a startup charter school that's pretty new, that principal is probably working 23 out of 24 hours a day. They're basically starting up like an entrepreneurial business, except that they're never going to make $1 million. They're never going to be able to sell it to Silicon Valley. This is something that they're doing because it's a passion project or because they just really believe in education. So yeah, be persistent. There is a guide about public library and school library partnerships from, I want to say 2017, because I helped work on that. I was on the interdivisional committee, but it's still on the ALA website out there if you can find it. It was a thing between ASL, YALSA, and ALESC. So it's out there. I would say it holds up pretty well. So go ahead and see if that is helpful. It has some templates and ideas and yeah, but whatever, I mean, it's hard, but I think it's worth it.
Then we have a few comments, but I'm going to skip along to there's one more question. Are charter schools open to donations, to library donations?
They should be. Yeah, there shouldn't be any reason why they can't take books or money. Technology can always be a hard thing to donate to schools because they have to have really careful policies about technology donations to make sure that they aren't putting something in the school that's like all full of viruses. But they should be able to take books. The question is whether there's somebody who can manage that. So I would, not just show up at their door with a truck full of books. Like, communicate first, see what they need, see what you can help with. But yeah, they should be able to take donations. There are some limits on fundraising for charter schools, but that depends on state law. I'm not entirely sure what the Texas state laws are around charter schools. That's another area that I need to do some research in just to figure out for myself how that works, because charter schools are managed differently in different states. But in some places, fundraising is a real barrier. So Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's give Dr. Klein another hand. Thank you so much. And hey, if you don't mind turning on your camera for a second, if you don't have it on, I want to get a picture. So I just want to take a quick screenshot and I'll tell you who's coming next month. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds on the count of 5, and then I'm going to take the picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold it. Just hold it, everyone. Don't move a muscle. And done. And I did want to tell you that next month, it'll be October 29th. We are going to switch gears a little bit and talk about new laws in Texas related to library collection. So Vanessa Ashcraft from our State Library Archives Commission in Texas is going to join us, and she's going to, in plain language that we can understand, thank goodness, she's going to tell us about House Bill 900, which has been around for a while, or at least a year or so, and then a new bill, SB 13, which just passed recently. So she's going to give us all the information that we need to know about how that will impact our library collection decisions. So the laws are changing so fast in Texas that it's hard to keep up. So I was like, we need help. We need someone to come and talk to us about this. And she's fabulous. And so she will be here on October 29th. And I will make sure and send out information to remind you to register. But thank you all so much for coming in. Thank you so much, Dr. Klein. You were fabulous. We enjoyed hearing about your research.
Okay, thanks everybody. It was nice to see you all.
Good night, everyone. Have a great night. Bye. Bye-bye.